Hello, welcome back to Reading Aloud in the Forest. We are reading Forest Folklore, and we are on page 95 of Mythical Denizens. I am actually parked in a parking lot. I'm sitting in the trunk of my vehicle. This is how I felt like doing it today. We're just outside of a forest here. This parking lot used to actually be a part of the forest, and a couple decades ago, to be honest, I had a cat I really loved named Freya, and it was a very beautiful, very soft, very pretty ginger cat. And when it passed away, someone I knew buried it here in the forest for me. And since then, the forest has been chopped down and then turned into a parking lot in the area where my cat was buried. So I guess they may have moved my cat's burial site, but that's where I'm parked at. And yeah, this is where I felt like parking and reading my story today. So, where shall I start? I will actually start on page 94, because I know we were on 95, but I'm going to start off here, because I don't want to leave any out. I'd rather repeat a little bit than leave any out. So let's see how far we get in our story reading today. We hear very little of fairies in Germany, at least as they were known in Britain, owing probably to the coarseness of the Teutonic mentality, being unable to appreciate the delicacy of these ethereal beings. But beings very similar appear to have been believed in, as it is said that they possessed, along with the Waldgeister, the secret of medicinal plants, and from time to time made some of these secrets known to their favorites among mortals. Elves, however, closely akin to the fairy race, were well known and appear in many tales and legends. They were said to be the children of witches by the devil and could assume at will many various forms, such as butterflies, caterpillars, and others. The witches could conjure them into many things, sometimes into the stem of a tree in the shape of a caterpillar, and as it bored the tree or others ate the foliage, so the hearts of those people were troubled, whom the witches desired to injure. This is an instance of how natural phenomenon came to be regarded as due to supernatural influences, and Shakespeare, taking advantage of the belief in these beings, tells in Tempest that Prospero there were some sounds from a truck near me. I was wondering what it was. So anyhow, tells in Tempest that Prospero reminds Ariel how Sycorax, the witch, did confine thee by help of her more potent ministers, and in her most unmitigable rage into a cloven pine, within which rift imprisoned thou didst painfully remain 12 years, where thou didst vent thy groans, and that it was mine art when I arrived and heard thee, that made gape the pine and let thee out. Prospero then lays his hands on Ariel, threatening that if more thou murmurs, I will rend an oak and peg thee in his knotty entrails till thou hast howled away 12 winters. Now then, just a moment. I do need a little spray of this, because even though I'm in my car and not deep in the woods, they are coming for me. Those nutty little sand flies and nippers. That's better. All right. Let's see. Back to the tale. These elves were of a somewhat malicious... Oh, wait, Prospero... Okay, so he said, "Thou hast howled away 12 winters." These elves were of a somewhat malicious disposition. They usually resided underground, but in some cases made the forests their abode, where trees were their homes, and the holes so often found in oak trunks were supposed to be their means of entrance and exit, while to them were also ascribed the knotholes found in timber. Grimm mentions a tale told in Smaland regarding the ancestries of a certain family as being an elf maid. It was said that she came into the house through a knothole in the wall, along with the sunbeams, and married the son of the house. She bore him 4 children and then vanished in the same way as she had come. People were very careful not to offend the elves, and they studiously refrained from spying upon them, or prying into their doings in their sylvan retreats. Their power was of a nature to be dreaded, and mysterious illnesses affected those to whom they took in ill will, while in many cases death followed an offense against them. As an instance of this latter, a German legend mentioned by Mannhardt tells how an old woman tried to uproot a fir tree in which an elf dwelt. The elf was wounded unto death, and at the moment it died, the old woman died also. This legend seems to have given rise to the custom, probably yet prevalent in the vast forests of Germany and Russia, of cutting old fir trees off near the roots instead of uprooting them. The elves are said to be very much afraid of thunder, and the Esthonians say that during a thunderstorm they burrow several feet under the roots of the trees they inhabit for protection. The forest elf, or Schrat, like the dwarf in the tale of Rudleb, has a great aversion to a guest who blows hot and cold. In the songs of Bohemia, tremor and terror are personified by 2 spectral shades called Tras and Strak. These are pictures as bursting out from the gloom of the forests onto the hordes of the enemy, and are said to clutch them by the throat and squeeze out loud cries of terror. Very interesting denizens of the forest were the swan maidens, of whom Grimm says that the volant de Courvois, opens with the words, "Maids flew from south through murky wood to the seashore, where they tarried 7 years till they grew homesick. They could resist no longer and returned to the somber wood." In some instances, the wicked stepmother changed the maiden into a swan, and one tale relates how the hero, finding the 7 swans, transformed them into maidens again by the aid of woven shirts. Of these shirts, they having been made in a hurry, one lacked a sleeve, and consequently the youngest of the maidens had to be content with a wing instead of an arm. A Slavonic legend tells how a youth was reposing in a forest, lulled with a gentle breeze murmuring in the trees. To him fluttered a snow-white swan, which alighted on his breast. Clasping it to his heart, it changed into a lovely maiden, to whom he was united in marriage soon after. Storms in the forest were once attributed to the furious career of the wild huntsman, of whom many tales are told under various aspects in different lands. In Germany, the legend is very widely spread and seems to have descended from the highest antiquity. The most popular form of the legend is as follows. In Lower Saxony, it is told how Hans von Hackelberg was the chief master of the hounds to the Duke of Brunswick. He was a mighty huntsman and is said to have died in 1521 as the result of an accident. While on his deathbed, he refused to listen to the parson's exhortations regarding his fitness for heaven, replying to all, "The Lord may keep his heaven, so he leave me my hunting." Whereupon the parson said to him, "Hunt then till the day of judgment." Accordingly, such became his doom, and to this day he hunts when the storm rages in the forest, accompanied by his carriage horses and hounds. He pursues his wild career through the Thuringer Wald, the forest of the Harz, and particularly in the Hackle, a forest situated between Halberstadt, Groningen, and Durenberg, uttering his wild cry of hoo hoo. His approach is heralded by a distant baying or yelping of hounds, while a night owl, called by the people Tutossel, Toot Ursel, tooting Ursula, flies in front of him. This Ursula was said to have been a nun who, after her death, joined Hackelnberg and mingled her to-hoo with his hoo-hoo. Travelers, when he passes, fall silently on their faces and lie terror-stricken, listening to the barking of the dogs and the huntsman's weird hoo-hoo. There are several variations of this legend, one of which says that the huntsman at first lived a holy life in the Solling forest near Uslar, but was so much occupied in hunting and was so fond of the sport that on his deathbed he prayed God that his share of heaven might be to be allowed to hunt in the Solling till the judgment day. His wish was granted, and in that forest he fulfills his doom, and often at night the ghastly hunt is heard passing over. In Westphalia he is known as Hackelbarand, who, when alive, used to go hunting even on Sundays, for which desecration he was doomed to hunt in the air both by day and by night forever. There's a story of two young men from Bergkirchen who, while walking in the forest one evening on their way to see their sweethearts, heard a wild barking of dogs in the air and a voice calling, "Hoto, Hoto." Here the hunter was known as Hackelblock, and one of the youths having mocked his Hoto, Hoto, Hackelblock set the whole pack of hounds upon him. And from that time he was heard of nevermore. Grimm also relates that a Meister song was made by Michael Beheim on Eberhard, Count of Württemberg, who heard in the forest a sudden din and uproar vast. Then beholds a spectre who tells him the manner of his damnation. When alive, he was a lord that never had his fill of hunting, and at last made his request unto the Lord to let him hunt till the judgment day. The prayer was granted, and these 500 years, all but 50, he has hunted a stag that he never can overtake. His face is wrinkled as a sponge. A story of the wild huntsman relates. A story of the wild huntsman relates how a peasant and had a tug of war with him. The huntsman in the air and the peasant on the ground. A heavy chain was employed, and each time the huntsman pulled it up, the peasant twisted it round the stem of an oak, on loosening it when the former came down to see why he could not lift the peasant. 3 times this happened, and the peasant went home well rewarded for having held out against the huntsman, as the latter thought. Grimm quotes a story out of Kuhn's Nord, Sag number 69, which tells how a man went and stood under a tree in the forest through which the wild huntsman had his retinue rode. One of the latter, in passing, dealt the man a blow in the back with his axe, saying, "I will plant my axe in this tree." And from that time onward, the man had a hump. He waited till a year had elapsed, then went and stood under the tree again. The same person stepped out of the procession and said, "Now I'll take my axe out of the tree." And the man was at once relieved of his hump. Another tale of the wild huntsman quoted by Grimm is from E.M. Arndt's Märchen and Jugenderinnerungen. Oh, goodness. Right there. I-4014, and is as follows. In Saxony there lived in early times a rich and mighty prince who loved hunting above all things, and sharply punished in his subjects any breach of the forest laws. Once, when a boy barked a willow to make himself a whistle, he had his body cut open and his bells trained around the tree. A peasant having shot a stag, he had him fast riveted to the stag. At last he broke his own neck hunting by dashing up against a beech tree, and now in his grave he has no rest, but must hunt every night. He rides a white horse whose nostrils shoot out sparks, wears armor, cracks his whip, and is followed by a countless swarm of hounds. His cry is wad, wad, ho, ho, hallo. He keeps to forests and lonely heaths, avoiding the common highway. If he happens to come to a crossroad, down he goes, horse and all, and only picks himself up when past it. He hunts and pursues all manner of weird rabble, thieves, robbers, murderers, and witches. The forest of Fontainebleau was, and is even yet, of vast extent, many parts of it being practically unexplored, where the wolf and the wild boar still have their lairs in summer. In it, La Grande Veneur is still supposed to hunt, and is heard on stormy nights. Pointing at the word of the forest there, I really don't think I pronounced it correctly. The prey of the wild huntsman was, as already said, usually the little woodwives, and it is related that a peasant on one occasion, hearing the commotion around, joined in the furious hunt, and was rewarded next morning by finding a quarter of a woodwife hanging at his stable door. In some parts of the forests of the Harz Mountains, the wild huntsman had been identified with the wandering Jew. There it is said that he was a Jew who had refused to allow Christ to drink out of a horse trough, but had contemptuously told him to drink from the hoof marks of a horse in which a little water had gathered. The Jew's doom was to wander restlessly through the world till the judgment day. In the Scandinavian countries, very similar beliefs prevail as to the existence of elves, witches, demons, the wild huntsman, and others. In Denmark, the latter is believed to be the good King Waldemar, who, as a Zealand legend tells, was attracted by the influence of a magic ring, which had been thrown into a marsh, to a fair maiden, and after her death he was said to have sought consolation in hunting in the forest of Gur. There he hunts night and day in fulfillment of a wish similar to that of Hacklenberg, that God may keep his heavens so long as I can hunt in Gur forevermore. His ho-ho and the crack of his whip is heard as he rushes through the forest on a white horse, sometimes with his head under his left arm, and preceded by coal-black hounds with fiery tongues hanging from their mouths. In a wood called Grunwald, on the island of Moen, a spectral hunter called the Gronjet, or Green Giant, hunts on horseback, also carrying his head. His prey are the little woodwives, and he was once seen with a dead woodwife slung across his horse, when he was said to have exclaimed, 7 years have I chased her, now in Falster I have slain her. In Sweden, Odin is looked upon as the wild huntsman or spectral hunter. It is said that until very recently, when he was heard riding past in his boisterous career, attended by his ghostly host, the windows of all sick chambers were opened so that the soul, if it thought fit to depart, might have an opportunity of joining Odin in the furious chase. In the Scandinavian countries, there was a woodwife known as Huldra, who sometimes appeared as young and beautiful, but at other times she was old and ugly, and some accounts of her say that she was lovely only in front, while behind she was hideous and hollow. She had a tail which she was ever anxious to conceal, and was often heard singing a doleful melody called Hulderschlat. She was frequently to be seen in forests, and as an aged woman clad in grey, marching in front of her flock and carrying a milk pail. In Denmark, the forest demons often hid themselves in old cherry trees and did harm to those who approached them. The elves of Scandinavia, like the fairies of England, were very fond of dancing in the moonlight in the meadows, and to them were attributed those circles of brilliant green so often seen on the grassy sward. The elf man is said to have an aged appearance and to wear a low-crowned hat, but the elf maidens are young and attractive, though, like Huldra, they are hollow behind. They play on certain stringed instruments, and that so sweetly that young men had to be on their guard lest their hearts should be ravished. A species of elves in Sweden were known as grove damsels, or grove folk. These lived in the groves and protected the trees. The fairy race has long been looked upon with appreciative eyes in Britain, and particularly so in England. Thomas Hood dedicated his poem, The Plea of the Midsummer Fairies, to the Charles Lamb, and in the dedication he wrote, "It is my design in the following poem to celebrate, by an allegory, that immortality which Shakespeare has conferred on the fairy mythology by his Midsummer Night's Dream. But for him those pretty children of our childhood would leave barely their names to our maturer years. They belong as the mites upon the plum to the bloom of fancy, a thing generally too frail and beautiful to withstand the rude handling of time. But the poet, who made this most perishable part of the mind's creation equal to the most enduring, he has so intertwined the elfins with human sympathies and linked them by so many delightful associations with the productions of nature that they are as real to the mind's eye as their green magical circles to the outer sense. It would have been a pity for such a race to go extinct, even though they were but as the butterflies that hover about the leaves and blossoms of the visible world." The spots where the fairies congregated were of the most rural and romantic character, and they often liked to dance around oak trees. They were supposed to meet on a hill, in dale, forest, or mead, by paved fountain or by rushy brook, or on the beached margin of the sea, to dance their ringlets to the whistling wind. Shakespeare tells that Titania's bower was a bank whereon the wild thyme blows, where oxlips and the nodding violet grows, quite over-canopied with lush woodbine, with sweet musk roses, and with eglantine. One of the fairies mentioned by Shakespeare is the mischievous Puck, and Mr. Kiteley quotes the following passage from an essay on the Ignis Fatuus by Mr. Allies. "The peasantry of Alfric and those parts of Worcestershire say that they are sometimes what they call poke leaden, that is, that they are occasionally waylaid in the night by a mischievous sprite whom they call Poke, who leads them into ditches, bogs, pools, and other such scrapes, and then sets up a loud laugh and leaves them quite bewildered in the lurch." Mr. Kiteley says that this proves that in some parts the idea of Puck is a spirit haunting the woods and fields is still retained, and he adds that it is what in Devonshire is called being pixie-led. He also tells that a Devonshire girl had related that she once knew a man who, one night, could not find his way out of his own fields. All he could do until he recollected to turn his coat. And the moment he did so, he heard the pixies all fly away, up into the trees. And there they sat and laughed. Oh, how they did laugh. But the man then soon found his way out of the field. I find this interesting about this here, about saying that he had to turn his coat, because in Newfoundland we have fairy lore, and we tell people to turn their socks inside out before they go into the forest to avoid the fairies catching them, and also to bring some bread in their pocket. All right, so the Vale of Avalon, or the Island Valley of Avilion, of Arthurian romance, was the fairyland of Celtic tradition, and thither King Arthur was transported after being wounded. There his wounds were healed, and he became king of the island. He was also the heir to the kingdom of Oberon and all the other haunts of the fairy race, in whatever land they were situated. Oberon was the king of the fairies, and he had his queen, Titania. They are important figures in the fairy lore of the Middle Ages. Irish romance mentions the strand of the yew tree as a trysting place on earth for Cuchulainn and Fand. Anytime it sounds like I can't pronounce a word, I'm probably pointing it out in the video. The Pearl of Beauty and wife of Manannan, the Irish Celtic sea god. Sometimes the fairies of popular belief may be traced as being descended from some traditionally remembered personage who may or may not have had a real tangible existence. Thus, Queen Mab is said to have been originally the queen of a certain early Irish race, her name being Medeb, while Oberon has been traced to a dwarf named Alberich, who was the court jester of Dietrich of Bern. Mr. Grant Allen, Cornhill Magazine, 1881, suggests that most of the European fairy traditions had their origin in the early struggles between the Celts and Teutons. I'm not sure how to say that word either. And the race of small men who had preceded them. These latter, from their diminutive size, having given rise to the legendary tales in which the tiny fairies figure. In the beginning of the 18th century, a writer named Bourne, author of the Antiquitates Vulgaires, 1725, gave the following account of the popular belief in fairies. According to the description they give of them, who pretend to have seen them, they are in the shape of men exceeding little, and they are always clad in green and frequent the woods and fields. But generally they dance by moonlight when mortals are asleep and not capable of seeing them. As may be observed on the following morning, their dancing places being very distinguishable, for as they dance hand in hand, and so make a circle in their dance, so next day there will be seen rings and circles on the grass. I'm going to finish this page for now. Human intercourse with the fairies often led to the victim vanishing from the sight of his fellow beings for, it may be, centuries, during which period he was entertained in fairyland, and to him it appeared as though only one night had passed. Thomas the Rhymer was an instance of this in Scotland, and there is a tale regarding the Welsh fairies as follows. Early one fine summer morning, a young man had no sooner left an adjacent farmhouse than he heard a little bird singing most sweetly on a tree near at hand. Enchanted by the song, he sat down to listen to it. When it ceased, he arose, supposing, as he would be thought natural, that only a few minutes had elapsed. But what was his astonishment to see the tree under which he had sat all withered and dead. On returning to the house, he saw it changed also, with only an old man, a stranger to him, within it. On asking the old man what he was doing there, the latter angrily asked who it was who dared to insult him in his own house. "In your own house? Where's my mother and father?" said the young man, "whom I left here a few minutes since, when I listened to the most charming music under yon tree, which, when I arose, was withered and leafless. And all things, too, seem changed? Under the tree, music, what is your name?" "John," said he. "Poor John," exclaimed the old man. "I heard my grandfather, who was your father, often speak of you, and long did he bewail your absence. Fruitless inquiries were made of you, but old Caddy Madeline of Brechfa said that you were under the power of fairies, and would not be released until the last sap of that sycamore tree was dried up. Embrace, embrace, my dear uncle, your nephew." The old man then attempted to embrace him, but at that moment he crumbled into dust. So we're going to leave off here. I just finished page 104, so we'll be starting off at page 105 next. Forest Folklore, such a good book. It's one of my favorites for sure. It's getting dark out. It will be dark out very soon. And I hope you enjoyed this video. And I will be posting the next one soon. Love you, everybody.